Okay, 10 things atheists should stop doing now. I know, it sounds pretty definitive, doesn't it? Well, it's my opinion. So it is pretty much the final word. So this video was inspired by GM Skeptic in a video that he made, 4 more things that atheists should stop saying. My video was inspired by that, but there's going to be 2 key differences. The first is that I'm not going to spend the first few minutes of the video just making sure that I don't offend anybody, or please don't be annoyed that I've said something and trodden on your toes. Right, this is my opinion here. It's YouTube, you should know that by now. So if I say something that you disagree with, leave a comment, argue with me. That's the way that it works. The second difference is that he only gave you, just checking I've got the right number of fingers here, 4 things. I'm giving you 10. How about that for a bit of value for money? So let's get on with the list, and let's start off with number 1. Okay, actually it's number 1 because it's the one we're starting off with. We're not starting off with it because it's number 1. Number 1, stop using the phrase the atheist community. There is no atheist community. This is one that's got under my skin for over a decade now. If what you want to say is that something will hurt all atheists, then say something will hurt all atheists. Don't say something will hurt the atheist community. And the same goes true for the phrases like the gay community or the trans community. In all cases, these things are used to refer to all atheists around the world, or all trans people, or what have you, as if that's what constitutes a community. If you think that's what constitutes a community, a disparate group of people who often have very little in common other than this one characteristic, maybe have never interacted with one another, or go out of their way not to interact with some of the others because they can't stand them. If you think that's what constitutes a community, then I feel very sorry for you and the amount of community that you actually have in your life. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you cannot have atheist communities. There clearly are atheist communities, but that is very different. Back in the day, P.Z. Myers in his blogosphere was very much in an atheist community. I was involved in atheist communities, but we were not in the atheist community. We had virtually nothing to do with one another until we kind of collided, and then between those communities it was largely vitriol. That is not what a sense of community is. Indeed, on YouTube, a phrase that was coined somewhat after the fact was the phrase the Great Debate Community. And really that's what YouTube was. It was a series of great debate communities. It was atheists that were involved with theists, and that formed the community. Whereas there were other groups of atheists that you had nothing to do with, right? They were in another clique. They were in another little great debate community. And this is how it works. In politics, we don't talk about the left-wing community and the right-wing community, but we do talk about the political community because that is where the interaction is. It's often people crashing together. A community is not necessarily people who share the same opinions and beliefs, but it is people who interact with one another. Let's not use the word community just to refer to everybody as if they're all kind of in things together, because what that means is people can start to co-opt that language and claim that they're talking on behalf of all atheists because they're speaking for the atheist community, etc., etc. Number 2, stop equating atheism with skepticism. Now, I understand that there's a kind of desire maybe to big yourself up, but it has to be said that atheism doesn't really require a great deal of deep thought. It may well be true if you were brought up in a very religious household that you have to go through quite an intense process in some cases. A lot of reflection, a lot of rethought, the kind of processes that you would associate with skepticism to break the shackles of that religion. But for great swathes of people across Western Europe who are not brought up in very religious households, who are brought up in households of people, of parents that don't believe in God already, then not believing in God requires skepticism about as much as not believing in anything else. There is no requirement for an atheist to be a skeptic. And in my view, it kind of hems in. It makes atheism some kind of fringe activity, some kind of fringe belief that's never going to take off. It's just a kind of esoteric, intellectual thing rather than something very, very mundane, something that actually pertains in the United Kingdom to the majority of the population. The majority of the population do not believe in God. I would not say the majority of the population in the United Kingdom would reasonably be classed as skeptics. Number 3, stop equating atheism with secularism. Now, this is an interesting one because there's a large historical perspective that we can't overlook here, which is that in Western societies, Christianity has had the whip hand for many centuries now, and as a result of that, Christianity really has had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Consequently, atheists and the irreligious more generally have had a vested interest in secularism, and so the two things have been conflated. Indeed, that still exists in the United Kingdom. The Queen is the head of state, and she's also, as a result of that, the supreme governor of the Church of England. It doesn't get any less secular than that, folks, does it? But nevertheless, there have always been very religious-minded people who nevertheless have been committed secularists. They have understood the benefit of taking religion away from the business of the state and the government and the public sphere and making it a more personal pursuit. They've understood that. And this is one of, I suppose, the foundation stones of some of the great republics like the United States and France. So there have actually been practical applications of that. And then something that I've noticed more recently on YouTube, which is a growing number of people who are atheists, but who aren't secularists, who actually believe that there is such a benefit to society for religion that we should just try and maintain it anyway, and maintain it in the public sphere because it's good for us all. In other words, they don't believe in God, but they want all the stupid riffraff out there to keep believing in it. Let's keep them stupefied and believing a load of old nonsense because it's for the good, it's for the benefit of society. And they don't like these kind of secular structures because they see them as an anathema to a well-functioning society. So you have religious people who are secularists and you have atheists who are not secularists. Let's stop confusing those two things. Number 4, stop equating atheism with leftism. Okay, so I don't really like the term leftism. I'd rather have said left-wing politics or on the left, but I was on a sort of ism theme there and I wanted to keep it going a little bit longer. But the point is still the same. There is nothing intrinsically left-wing about atheism or intrinsically right-wing about religion and Christianity. Indeed, I suppose if you look at the teachings of Christ, they would seem more in line with typical left-wing positions of forgiveness, and rather than locking people up for long sentences, he didn't seem to be too enamoured with moneylenders and the sort of free market economics. Certainly by a lot of his actions, there doesn't seem to be anything intrinsically right-wing. It is true that in some countries such as the United States, or I am told Poland, that Christianity particularly has very much become associated with right-wing politics, and so I suppose those who are not Christian regard themselves as in opposition to that, so probably on the left, but that is not true of all countries. As I've shown in many videos, including one last month in January, I showed you the figures for the United Kingdom, and that religiosity and irreligiosity are evenly spread on the political left and on the political right. There is nothing intrinsic in the beliefs of the left that errs atheists towards those beliefs, I would say. You can believe in free market economics, you can believe that capitalist solutions as part of a mixed economy are the best way to function within a society and still be an atheist. Shock horror. Number 5, stop turning atheist events into political rallies. Okay, so this is one that maybe doesn't happen as often now as it used to because there are less atheist events. And it also applies, by the way, to skeptics events. I know, I said don't conflate the two, but the two have been conflated for years after years, and that's not on me, right? That's just something that I've got to deal with. The same thing has happened there. Now, look, I have no problem with political events, with political rallies. If what you want to do is associate with people who are politically like-minded, if you're on the left, you want to associate with people on the left. If you're on the right, you want to associate with people on the right. And what you want to have is a political rally, then have a political rally. But it's not your business to take a skeptic event or to take an atheist event and say, no, this is only for people who are politically like-minded. They have to be in the same sort of political sphere as me, otherwise they're not welcome. It is not your business to gatekeep those things. If it's an atheist event, then the qualifying criteria ought to be that you're an atheist, not that you're politically left-wing. And yet I recall a situation a few years ago where a few notable people were suggesting, for example, that people like Michael Shermer and Penn Jillette shouldn't be made welcome at these events because they are libertarians. Well, you can be a libertarian and be an atheist, or be a libertarian and be a skeptic. This is absolutely extraordinary way of carrying on, attempting to gatekeep in that manner. So this is the thing that I have here. And if you're not sure about what I'm talking about, go and check out a conference. You can do it on YouTube, Skepticon, and have a look at the speakers and what was being discussed 10 years ago, and have a look at what's been discussed the last few years. And you will see a conference there which started off as a conference about skepticism and now doesn't even make any pretense about that. It is just there for the ultra-progressive woke brigade. It's lost all pretense of being a skeptics conference, and this is what can happen. These are people who have co-opted and gate-kept that event, and they've turned it into their own political rally. You want a political rally? Have a political rally. Be my guest. There's lots of political rallies out there if what you want is a political rally, but don't try and make everything into a political rally. Number 6, stop proclaiming religion as a delusion. Now, quite honestly, I'm not really that bothered whether religion is a delusion or not. As I understand it, it wouldn't class as a delusion because the beliefs of religion kind of cohere generally with one another in the kind of way that we would regard as acceptable. It's not that one belief is aberrant in terms of how it coheres or fails to cohere with all your other beliefs. It's the equivalent, if I believed that the moon had been replaced with a large piece of cheese, that would be a delusion because it doesn't cohere with everything else I understand around the world. Whereas if I'd been brought up to believe that celestial bodies were made of cheese, then my belief that the moon is made of cheese would cohere with that larger understanding that I have about the world. So even though it would be still the same ludicrous belief, it would cohere with my understanding of the world, so that would not class as a delusion, because that would be my brain working the way it's supposed to work, if you like. The stupidity of a belief is not sufficient grounds for something to class as a delusion. But that isn't really what interests me. Even if it is a delusion, calling religion a delusion serves absolutely no purpose whatsoever. It's like calling people homophobic, transphobe, racist, bigot, blah, 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 at the drop of a hat, right? Unless these things are really, really justified, all you do is harden people from your position. Those labels don't persuade anybody. And telling people who are religious, who might be wavering, that their beliefs are just a delusion is just sneering at them. That's not convincing them. That's just sneering and damning them. And in my experience, those kinds of tactics don't actually work. Maybe they make you feel better about yourself, but they don't butter many parsnips. Number 7, stop declaring that babies are atheists. Okay, so there is one caveat with this, which is, I suppose, the original situation in which this was used was as a retort to those religious people who insinuate or outright declare that babies are somehow born Christians or Muslims, or at least deeply religious with a sense of God belief. It may well be true that babies are born with a susceptibility to supernatural thought. I think we're all susceptible to that, but that is a different thing to being born religious, and certainly a different thing to being born a Christian or believing in the Christian God. That is the one circumstance where I think this is a useful thing to retort with. Outside of that, it helps nothing, right? It doesn't impress anybody as to what babies believe. If babies agreed with your economic theory, right, that would not necessarily be a big selling point for your economic theory. So in those terms, terms, whether babies are born atheists, theists, or whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. Babies have not had a chance to mentally cogitate over things and arrive at sensible conclusions to process the information. So what babies do and do not believe, by and large, outside of those specific circumstances I mentioned, is kind of irrelevant. Number 8, stop insisting on specific rigid definitions of atheist. Or indeed the same would apply to the word agnostic. Just let it go, folks. Just accept the fact that different people use words in different ways and that is okay. And that by and large, when it comes to people labelling themselves, allow them to do so and use the labels in the way that they wish to do so. But having said all of that, that does not preclude you from having specific definitions and applying those definitions to people when you want to achieve some kind of a goal. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, if you ask people whether you identify as an atheist, you'll probably only get about 15% of the population saying that. Nevertheless, if you ask the question, do you believe in God, only about 35% of the population affirm that. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you don't affirm that, then you are an atheist. So I can hold in tension the label that people apply to themselves, whereas how I would label them for the statistical purposes of affording how many atheists are in the United Kingdom. I wouldn't just go by self-labeling. Self-identification, I think, is the other end of the spectrum, and it really doesn't make any sense. Saying that an atheist is somebody who identifies as an atheist is very extreme and makes about as much sense as I suppose we're having with the trans discussion now. We're at the extreme extent of it. There are some people who claim that all a man is somebody who identifies as a man. Of course, the problem there is that means that saying I identify as a man means that I identify as someone who identifies as a man, where a man is somebody who identifies as a man. So you're saying I identify as somebody who identifies as somebody who identifies as a man, where man is somebody who identifies as a man. So I identify as somebody who identifies as somebody who identifies as somebody who identifies as a man. And the same thing would be true for atheism. You could go on for a long time with that, couldn't it? It's self-referential and it gets you absolutely nowhere. All these things have to mean something a little more than simply self-identification, and so it is with atheism. But if somebody wants to identify as an atheist, call them an atheist. If they don't want to identify as an atheist, say, okay, I won't call you an atheist. But when you're making your little statistical analysis of who's an atheist, you are free to regard them by your definition as an atheist. Don't sweat it. Live with the fact that different definitions can exist alongside one another. As long as we're consistent, we state our definitions and we state what we mean, that isn't an issue. Number 9, stop acting as if most atheists are ex-Christians. Why? Because they are not. I showed you back in January last month, that's not even true in the United States, that in the United States, the growth in the irreligious category is largely a generational thing. It is not people losing their religion, it is people not really ever being religious to begin with. I propose that what we see online is a fairly unrepresentative sample. People generally who grow up from a non-religious background and don't believe in God generally are not the ones that are motivated to go out there and be talking about it and are very sort of hyped up about it. So the kinds of people that you're more likely to see on Twitter, that you're more likely to see on YouTube, are perhaps those who had a religion and have had to fight their way through a process of losing some of the beliefs that they had because they realised that they didn't make sense. And that's quite a process that they've gone through, so that those people are overrepresented. But please don't make that out. I've lost count of the number of times I've seen the assumption made, hey, if you're an atheist, tell us about how you lost your religion. Tell us about how your process of deconverting from being a Christian. That simply is not the case to the vast majority of the irreligious and of atheists out there, even in a country like the United States. Number 10, to wrap it up, stop sweating the small stuff. So I wanted to finish on, I suppose, a positive point, and this would be the positive point. Too often I've seen atheists pick about things that aren't really that important, okay? There are major things within society, such as faith schools within the United Kingdom, state-funded schools, taxpayer-funded schools that are run by the Church of England or the Catholic Church. Those are things which are a significant issue. But don't worry about the little bits that don't matter. You'll see some billboard or some Christmas display in some shopping centre or something like that that somebody's bothered about because it's got a religious theme. Honestly, none of that matters. The good news is that, and I've shown the statistics again and again now, that across the Western world, across Europe and across North America, that religion is dying, and dying at a rapid pace. That is happening. You don't need to worry about these little things. They will just go in the fullness of time. Railing against those things aren't achieving anything. The process is going about as maximally fast as it can. Every generation is significantly less religious than the generation before it. The things are happening without you worrying about those things. The big things, the things that maybe you'd like to see change, that need to be changing now, not in 50 years time or 100 years time, sweat those things, but don't sweat the small stuff. Just listen with those. It's part of the death throes. It's part of the death rattle of religion having a central theme within our society. So take it for what it is and have a smile on your face. Enjoy it as part of the culture, in fact. Okay, that is my top 10. I am sure for most of you there'll be something that you don't agree with there. Leave your comments. I'll try and make an extra effort on this video to look through every single one of them and to interact with as many as I can. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up, share it, subscribe, all the good stuff. If you enjoy my work, you can subscribe for me on PayPal recurring payments, Subscribestar, or Patreon. And Patreon, you only pay for the videos that I make. So if I have some slack months where I only make 1 or 2 videos, those are the only things that you would be supporting me for. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching, and bye.